Hello, my name is Serafina Fletcher, and if you've ever been the one left out of the family photo, if you've ever had your name erased while the world smiled around you, then maybe you'll understand why I walked away. My sister once threw a chair at me and cracked my tooth. My mother didn't ask if I was okay, she just said, "Serves you right." That should have broken me, but it didn't. I left quietly. I took a single box, my name on one deed, a voice recording from my father, and the last piece of proof that I ever existed in that house. And when they finally came crawling back, why do you think I laughed? I could smell the roast chicken before I even pushed the screen door open. That smell used to mean comfort to me. Sundays, my dad carving meat while my mother passed potatoes with a forced smile. But now it just tightened something at the back of my throat. The dining room was bright with late October sunlight cutting across the antique china cabinet. It looked exactly the same as when I left for college, yet everything inside me had shifted. I walked in carrying a pie from a bakery downtown, trying to keep my voice calm as I said hello. Callista was already seated at the head of the table where my father used to sit. Mom, Vera, floated between the kitchen and the table, refilling glasses, pretending nothing was off. I sat down at the far end. The plate in front of me was one of those old porcelain ones with the blue border, a chip at the rim from when I was 10. The table was covered with a cream cloth, ironed flat. I noticed how perfect it all looked, but under the neatness there was a tension, like a wire ready to snap. My palms were damp. It was supposed to be a casual family lunch, but I'd seen enough of these lunches to know how quickly they turned. Couldn't even bring a casserole? Callista's voice carried across the table before I had even unfolded my napkin. She smiled at the others like she was telling a joke. Serafina shows up empty-handed. Again, some things never change. I kept my eyes on my plate. "I brought dessert," I said quietly. "A store-bought pie," she snorted. "Wow! Thought you'd at least pretend you had your life together. But I guess when you're still bouncing between jobs, what can we expect?" Mom didn't look up from arranging the bread basket. She let out a little chuckle. "Callista, be nice," she murmured, but it sounded like a line she'd rehearsed, not a reprimand. The noise of forks against plates, the clink of glasses, every sound felt too loud. I tried to swallow my irritation, but it rose like heat in my chest. "Better to bring peace than poison," I said, my voice steady but cool. Callista's smile dropped. She set down her fork slowly, like she was about to stand. "What did you just say to me?" I said maybe we don't need to keep tearing each other down at a family meal. Her chair scraped loudly as she stood. "You always think you're above us," she hissed. "Coming in here with your little speeches, acting like you're better than this family. You're nothing but a guest now." Mom's eyes flicked up, then quickly back down. No one told Callista to stop. "Sit down, Callista," I said evenly. "It's not worth it." That was when she moved. She grabbed one of the small decorative chairs from the corner, the one with the woven seat our grandmother had left us, and before I could react, she swung it. Time slowed, the chair crossing the space between us, my hand coming up too late, the crack of wood meeting my face. Pain shot through my mouth, a sharp crack like glass breaking. The chair clattered to the floor. I reached up and felt the jagged edge of a broken tooth, warm blood pooling in my mouth. Everything was silent, except for my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Mom came rushing in from the kitchen, but not to me. She stood in front of Callista, her hand on her arm. "What on earth happened here?" she demanded, glaring at me. "She provoked me," Callista said smoothly, like she'd been waiting for this. "She's always provoking me." I tried to speak, but my lip trembled. Blood smeared on my fingers. Mom's gaze locked on me, cold and sharp. "You talk back too much. Serves you right," she said flatly. The words hit harder than the chair. I felt a hot sting behind my eyes, but refused to let a tear fall. Without a word, I stood up and walked down the hall to the bathroom. The mirror above the sink showed me a stranger, hair falling into my face, a thin line of blood at the corner of my mouth, a tooth chipped like a jagged stone. On the towel rack hung a faded monogrammed towel, my initials from when I was a kid. I pressed it to my lip, breathing slowly until the pounding in my head eased. My reflection stared back at me, eyes rimmed with fury, but clear. I wasn't 12 anymore. I wasn't helpless. I walked back to the dining room, every step measured. Callista sat down again, smirking like a cat. Mom stood by the stove, arms crossed. No one said a word. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair and slipped it on. "This is the last time I come here as your daughter," I said quietly. Mom scoffed. "Don't be dramatic." Callista smirked harder, tilting her head. "Yeah, sure, Serafina. See you at Christmas." I opened the door and stepped out into the pale afternoon light. The air was cool and smelled faintly of pine. My car was parked at the curb, and my hands shook as I unlocked it, but not from fear anymore, from something firmer, heavier. I drove away without looking back at the house. The next 3 days blurred together. I worked my shifts at the bookstore, drank tea instead of coffee because my mouth ached, and tried not to check my phone. But the calls came anyway. First Mom, then Callista, then unknown numbers. Texts piled up. "We need to talk." "Something urgent happened. Please call." On the third evening, sitting on my apartment floor with the lights off, I listened to one of the voicemails. Mom's voice, thinner now. "Serafina, we need your help. Please pick up." I played it again, this time with a small, bitter smile. "Now you want something from me?" I whispered to myself. I didn't call back. Instead, a sound rose from my throat. Not a sob, but a low, almost amused laugh. It startled even me. I covered my mouth, then let it out fully. A short burst of air and disbelief. After years of swallowing every insult, every wound, I laughed because for the first time, I knew they needed me more than I ever needed them. The sound of my own laugh lingered in the apartment, barely a whisper of what it used to be. Dry, sharp, empty. Not the kind of laugh you give when something is truly funny, but the kind that escapes when irony slices too deep. The kind you don't control. The kind that doesn't come from joy, but from a place too exhausted to cry. It had burst from my lips just moments before the alarm clock started buzzing at 6, as if the universe had the timing down perfectly. One last bark of bitter amusement before reality reminded me I had things to do. The gray light of early autumn pushed through my cheap curtains, painting everything in a dull, wet hue. The air smelled like damp leaves and concrete, with the faintest trace of mildew from last night's rain drifting in through the cracked window. My jaw ached. Not just from the molar that throbbed relentlessly, but from the tension that had settled there, clenched and unyielding for days. No, longer than that. Maybe years. It wasn't pain from one punch, one night, one argument. It was cumulative. A bruise that hadn't formed on the surface, but had been blooming in my chest over the course of a lifetime. I sat up slowly, the blanket sliding off my shoulders, the chill in the room rushing to greet my skin. The wooden floor was cold under my bare feet, almost shockingly so. My breath fogged lightly in the air, just barely. I needed to fix the insulation in the windows. Add it to the list. The apartment was small, some would say cramped, but it was mine. A one-bedroom rental on the edge of Savannah, with peeling paint around the window frames and a kitchen light that flickered when I ran the microwave. I loved it like a secret. It had always been my hideout, my sanctuary. The only place where I didn't have to perform, didn't have to defend myself, didn't have to shrink. The lavender detergent on the sheets lingered in the air, mixing with yesterday's coffee grounds in the trash. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Honest. Unlike the house I'd grown up in, where even the air seemed rehearsed. I pulled an oversized sweater over my head, tugged thick socks onto my feet, and shuffled into the kitchen. That's when I saw it again. The cardboard box. It sat on the counter like a guest that had overstayed its welcome. I'd carried it out of my mother's house the night before, during the chaos, when no one was paying attention, because no one ever paid attention to me. They had been too busy salvaging reputations, whispering about optics, arguing over what could still be kept quiet. But I hadn't been interested in the drama. I'd had my eye on something else. That box wasn't heavy, not in a physical sense, but it might as well have weighed 100 pounds with everything it carried. I ran my hand over the tape, brittle and curling at the edges, then slowly peeled it back. Inside were documents, old, yellowing, some wrapped with rubber bands that had gone soft and gummy, tax filings, property deeds, account ledgers. Near the bottom, a flash drive with the label Savannah Holdings written in my father's crisp, mechanical hand. And then, an envelope. It was old. The paper had darkened to a buttery cream, and the handwriting across the front was unmistakably his. For S? I stared at it. My fingers hovered above it, then pulled away. I wasn't ready. Not yet. There are some doors you open with both hands, and some that ask for silence, patience, timing. Instead, I made coffee. The cheap kind in the red-lidded canister I'd picked up from the corner bodega. It was bitter and too acidic, but it filled the kitchen with something warm. I sat at the table and wrapped my hands around the mug, the steam curling upward like a veil between me and the mess I'd uncovered. Then, I started sorting. The first papers I lifted were brittle with age, curling at the corners. A photograph fluttered out from between two folders and landed face up on the table. My chest tightened instantly. It was from high school. Our annual fall barbecue in the backyard. I could practically smell the charcoal briquettes, hear the crackle of burning leaves, the fizz of soda cans being opened. In the photo, my sister Callista stood in the center, radiant in her cheer uniform, smile dazzling and effortless. To her left stood my mother, one hand resting lightly on her daughter's shoulder. To the right, my father, his eyes glinting in the sunlight. And where I should have been was a void. A perfect oval had been cut out of the photograph, precision scissored. My whole body removed from the memory, like I had never existed in it. I remembered that picture. It had hung in the hallway for years. When I first noticed my absence, I'd asked my mother about it. She hadn't even looked up from her magazine. It wasn't flattering, she'd said. Don't be so sensitive. I swallowed hard and stared at the picture now, the sharp cut lines, the way the whole almost looked neat, purposeful. Every inch of that photo screamed exactly what I had always known, but never said aloud. I wasn't supposed to be remembered, not like them. The weight in my chest didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt like clarity, like the aftertaste of truth. I picked up the stack of papers again, sorted them into piles, bank statements, real estate holdings, silent partnerships, life insurance policies with my father's distinct angular signature. I wasn't just cleaning anymore. I was assembling. A record. A case. Evidence. The coffee had long gone cold, but I didn't care. The flash drive went into my laptop, the files copied to an external hard drive. Folder after folder opened like trapdoors. Offshore transfers, corporate shell games, cash flow to entities I didn't recognize. I knew enough to see what this was. Not just secrets, intentional omissions. And I had them now. I kept glancing at the envelope. For S. His last letter, maybe. His last words to the daughter he barely acknowledged. I picked it up, turned it over. The seal had yellowed and cracked. My thumb pressed against the edge, ready to break the tape. Then I stopped. Not yet, not until I know what I'm ready to do with it. The window creaked with the wind, and for a brief moment it sounded like someone knocking. I looked toward my phone on the counter. Still no messages. The last voicemail from my mother was still there, marked unread. I reached for it, then stopped. Some things don't need to be heard again. I set the envelope gently on top of the rest of the papers, next to the photo, the flash drive, the stack of legal forms. My voice came out in a low murmur, steady and sure. It's not just about what they did. It's about how long they've been doing it. And now? Now I had the receipts. I sat still for a long time after the recording ended. The sound of my father's voice, steady, low, unmistakably him, still hung in the air. It was like a breath I'd been holding for over a decade finally found its way out. His words weren't emotional. He didn't cry or apologize. He simply laid out what he'd seen, what he knew they'd do, what they were already doing. If you're hearing this, he'd said, they've gone too far. I tried to protect you the only way I could. I'm sorry I didn't do more. That was it. No long explanation, no instructions. But it was enough. Enough to confirm that I wasn't crazy. That I hadn't imagined the slights, the dismissals, the quiet war of being slowly replaced in my own family. That night, I didn't sleep much. The sky outside stayed overcast, the kind of thick cloud cover that makes it feel like the world is holding its breath. I paced the apartment in thick socks and an old hoodie, sipping cold tea from a chipped mug. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. Not in the way people expect. It was colder than that. I was cataloging. Every memory. Every moment. Every insult dressed up as concern. Around noon the next day, my phone buzzed. A message from Jenna, a girl I went to high school with, someone I hadn't heard from in years. Hey, saw pics from your mom's big event. Crazy turnout. Her speech was intense. Hope you're doing okay. I stared at the screen. What event? A few seconds later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched Vera Fletcher Women of Community Gala Savannah, and there it was. Pictures, news blurbs, tagged posts. Vera smiling at the podium, holding a plaque. Callista beside her, arm around her waist, wearing that smug grin like it had been stitched onto her face since birth. A line of relatives behind them, clapping. Cousins I hadn't seen in 10 years. Neighbors. Even my old Sunday school teacher. I wasn't in a single photo. I hadn't even known it was happening. Scrolling further, I saw a close-up of a display table. Memorabilia. Childhood crafts. School projects. In the center, inside a small gold frame, was a popsicle stick picture frame I had made in 7th grade. Purple glitter glue, plastic jewels, the works. I'd made it for Mother's Day. I still remembered sitting on the floor with it in my lap, trying to make the corners match just right. But now, the small tag underneath read, Callista's 7th grade art, Mother's Day gift. My name was gone. My breath caught in my throat, not like I was choking, more like a pause I couldn't hit play on. The caption was so casual, so confident, as if it had always belonged to her. That frame sat on Vera's nightstand for years. I used to check if she still kept it. She always did. But apparently keeping it wasn't enough. Now she needed to rewrite where it came from. This wasn't an isolated event. Suddenly, I could recall all the times they'd told stories at family dinners. How Callista had organized that bake sale in middle school. No, that was me. How she'd won the district essay contest. Also me. I remembered the church bulletin the year I made honor roll. It had listed Callista's name under achievements. Mine was never mentioned. When I brought it up to Mom, she waved it off. Don't be petty, Serafina. Your sister deserves some recognition. They didn't just ignore me. They reallocated me. Like a spare bedroom converted into a study. Like furniture repurposed and repainted. Still here, but no longer mine. I closed my laptop. My head buzzed, like static on a radio that couldn't find a clear channel. I walked to the window and opened it wider. The cold bit at my skin, but I welcomed it. It made me feel present. Awake. Whispering to the air, I said, "They've replaced me, while I'm still breathing." There was no breaking point. Just a shift. Like a tide turning so gradually you don't notice until the water is at your knees. I didn't rage, I didn't cry, I just moved. I pulled out my old metal file cabinet from the hallway closet, set it on the floor next to the kitchen table. I began sorting the documents from the box, anything with a signature, any paper trail that showed my name being removed, altered, replaced, receipts, emails, birth certificates. Dad had kept more than I realized. Quiet man that he was, he'd apparently prepared for storms in silence. I made digital copies of everything, uploaded them to a cloud drive, then to an external hard drive. I wasn't going to let them vanish me. Around 5 that evening, the clouds outside darkened. The scent of rain began to rise from the pavement below. I poured myself another cup of tea and sat with the yellow envelope again. I had read the letter, heard the voice recording, but I knew there was more in that box. Digging deeper, I found a folder that had been taped shut. Inside, notes in my father's handwriting, dates, quotes from conversations he'd overheard between Vera and Callista. Change deed before probate. Serafina too soft to fight. Frame in master closet, hide original. I sat back in my chair. My hands trembled, but my breath was even. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't some family squabble. This was theft. They wanted to erase me. Then I'd become undeniable. I labeled the folder Restoration. It would grow, and so would I. The rain started before dusk and had not stopped by the time I pressed play again. It rattled softly against the windows of my apartment, a kind of white noise that made my father's voice even clearer. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, legs crossed, the yellow envelope open beside me. My laptop screen dimmed itself to sleep, but I didn't move to wake it. All my attention was on that voice. "There are things I couldn't say while alive," he said, steady but heavy, like he was pressing each word into me. "But I saw it. I saw what they were doing to you." I drew in a breath and held it. His tone changed, just a little, the way it used to when he came home late from work and tried not to wake me. "They moved things, property deeds, savings accounts. I signed what I thought was routine. It wasn't. It was their plan. And I saw the way they looked at you. Like you were a burden. Like you were someone to erase. I am sorry I didn't stop it. Maybe this helps you stop it now." His voice cracked at the last line. It wasn't the crack of a weak man. It was the sound of someone reaching the limit of what he could carry and trying to hand off the load. I stopped the recording and stared at the rain tracing lines down the glass. That was the first time I'd ever heard my father admit he couldn't protect me. And somehow, instead of breaking me, it steadied me. I wrapped my arms around my knees and let my mind drift backward, not far, just 3 years, a family picnic at Forsyth Park. I had worn a simple blue sundress and brought a homemade pie. Callista arrived in a designer outfit with a store-bought cake and still got credit for bringing the homemade touch. I'd laughed it off at the time. That was what you did in my family. You laughed it off, or you got labeled difficult. I remembered sitting under the oak tree, my niece toddling up to me with a plastic cup of lemonade. Her curls bounced, and her eyes were the same shade of green mine had been at that age. I bent down and smiled. "Hey, sweetie, remember me?" She tilted her head, looked back at Callista, then back at me. "Mom said you're not really part of us anymore. Who are you?" It had been like a pinprick then, small but sharp. I'd forced a chuckle and said, "Just Aunt Sarah, honey." But the words stuck. They were a script she'd learned, not an accident. And tonight, listening to my father's voice, I could feel the echo of that moment louder than ever. Another memory slid in. Not so much a flashback as a film reel unspooling at the edge of my awareness. It was Vera's gala, the night they honored her. I had arrived quietly, no one greeting me. A guest, someone I'd never met, looked me up and down and said, "Oh good, the staff's here. Could you bring me a drink?" Before I could answer, Vera appeared at my side, smiling like a queen. She handed me a tray of champagne flutes and whispered, "Make yourself useful." I had walked the room for 10 minutes, handing out drinks, smiling at people who didn't know me. I'd thought it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. It was scripted. She wanted me invisible. Or at least, she wanted me useful in my invisibility. My fingers curled into the carpet now as the rain fell harder. That humiliation had been so quiet at the time I'd almost convinced myself it didn't matter, but it did. It was a public demonstration of a private truth. In her eyes, I was staff, not family. I didn't cry. Not this time. I no longer needed to. Grief had been burned down to something more durable. I stood up, stretched the stiffness from my legs, and moved to the kitchen table. My laptop woke with a soft glow. I opened a new folder on my desktop and named it Restoration. Inside it, I began dragging files, scans of deeds, bank statements, screenshots of emails, photos of my crafts misattributed to Callista, even the voice recording of my father. Every piece of evidence, every breadcrumb of the erasure. As I worked, the apartment felt less like a hiding place and more like a command center. I whispered to myself, "If they won't say my name, I'll make sure the world does." The rain outside softened to a mist. In the quiet, the weight of my father's recording sat on my shoulders like a coat, heavy but protective. I opened one more file from the box, a set of scanned documents of the house deed. My name at the top of the original title, Serafina Dawn Fletcher. My fingers traced it on the screen. Then I opened the current copy, Callista L. Fletcher. At the bottom, a signature that was supposed to be mine but wasn't. It slanted wrong. The loops were too tight. It was forged. I leaned back in my chair. The ache in my jaw from the chipped tooth pulsed once, twice, then faded into the background. My mind was clear. They hadn't just erased me. They'd tried to take everything I had left. The glow of the laptop reflected off the window, merging with my reflection. For the first time in weeks, my own eyes looked back at me steady, unflinching. They didn't just erase me, I murmured. They tried to steal everything I had left. After hours of sorting and labeling every document I had, I knew the next step wasn't about how much I felt. It was about how much I could prove. I spent most of the following week submerged in files, my apartment becoming a makeshift evidence room. I only left to get groceries and the occasional secondhand coffee from the small Cuban cafe a block over. The storm outside had been brewing for days, and now it matched the one I carried inside. It was a Thursday evening when I finally sat down and did a side-by-side comparison of the property deeds. The original title, dated 5 years ago, had my full name on it, Serafina Dawn Fletcher. My father's signature was there too. Neat, distinct. He always signed like he was etching something permanent. The notary stamp matched his last documented appearance at the courthouse. Then came the copy they'd filed more recently. This one listed Callista as the legal owner. My name was nowhere on it. There, on the signature line, was something that claimed to be my father's signature, scribbled next to a date that came 2 months after his death. The ink was different. The slant was all wrong. The way the M curled looked like it had been copied from a scanned image. Rushed. Uneven. I didn't need to be a forensic analyst to know what I was seeing. But I took photos, ran them through software anyway. Side by side, they told a story I already knew but could now show. Someone had faked my father's signature on a legal document to take what he had left for me and place it under Callista's name. My hands trembled, not from shock, but from the fury I'd been holding back since the day that chair came flying at my face. I stared at the screen, jaw tight. My dad's signature was supposed to mean protection, permanence. Now it was a weapon turned against me. I needed more. Not for me, for whatever legal war this would become. That meant combing through old phones, emails, backup drives. I pulled out a box of dead electronics I hadn't touched in years. 2 cracked iPhones, an external hard drive from college, a drawer full of tangled cords. I plugged everything in, piece by piece, waiting for life to flicker through the dust. One by one, they lit up. And after a few hours of digging through folders labeled MISC and stuff to sort, I found it, buried in the screenshots folder of my second laptop. A message from Callista. It was 2 years old. I remembered it well, but until that moment, I hadn't realized I still had a copy. I only did what Mom told me to, she had written. She said it was just paperwork. I didn't know he left anything to you. Don't make this a thing. The message had been deleted from my phone when we got into a fight 6 months later. She claimed I made it up, but I had saved it. Not because I expected to use it, but because some part of me had known I'd need it. Now I opened the screenshot and stared at her words. Not an apology, not remorse, just justification. The kind of sentence people write when they still think they'll get away with it. I printed it, dated it, labeled it. Then I sat there at my table with the rain tapping harder outside and let myself feel the full weight of what they'd done. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just a lie. It was an entire history rewritten while I was still breathing. This was where I had my first scraped knee, where my dad taught me to drive, where I had my first kiss, under the magnolia tree in the backyard. That house wasn't just real estate, it was my legacy. And they tried to white it out with a pen and a printer and a smug sense of entitlement. The betrayal cut deeper, not because it was a surprise, but because it wasn't. I picked up my phone and called the only person I knew who wouldn't tell me to calm down or prey on it. Maris, I said, not bothering with hello. I have proof, not guesses, not gut feelings. Proof. Her voice on the other end was immediate and serious. What kind of proof? Property theft, a forged signature, a deleted confession I backed up. There was a pause. Then, you need a lawyer. I didn't respond. I know someone, she added. Her name's Isolde Graves. She doesn't lose cases, especially not ones where women get erased. I stared at the document in front of me. Can you connect us? Already on it. That night, I drafted a formal request for legal consultation. I included all the scanned documents, the screenshot, even a short timeline of events. I didn't bother with emotion, just facts. Facts that would be hard to look away from. Before bed, I checked my email one last time. There it was, a reply. Subject: preliminary meeting confirmed. Message: Ms. Graves has an opening Tuesday morning at 9:30 a.m. Please bring all relevant documents. I exhaled slowly, staring at the screen. Then I whispered, "You're going to know who I am." Tuesday came faster than I expected. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I sat up in bed going through my flash drive again and again, rereading every document, every signature, every message. And I didn't just want to be ready, I wanted to be undeniable. By Thursday afternoon, I was standing outside a sleek office building downtown. It had a minimalist plaque out front, Graves More. The air was crisp, the kind that stung your cheeks but cleared your head. I took one last breath, squared my shoulders, and pushed the door open. Inside, everything was glass and steel. No paintings, no fake plants, just efficiency. A woman behind a frosted glass desk nodded once when I said my name and buzzed me through. I didn't wait long. Isolde Graves opened her office door herself. She was tall, older than me, maybe mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked like it could slice through paper. She wore all black and didn't bother with a handshake. "Show me the paperwork," she said, motioning me to sit. I pulled out the flash drive and slid it across her desk. Her hand hovered over her mouse, and within seconds, the files loaded. She clicked through each one silently. Deed records, forged signatures. The text from Callista, my father's voice recording. A few minutes passed in absolute silence, and then, barely perceptible, she smiled. Not a warm smile, the kind of smile you give when someone walks into court thinking they're untouchable, and you know something they don't. "This," she said, eyes still on the screen, "isn't just forgery. This is a civil takedown waiting to happen." She turned to me fully. "Are you ready for this?" "They threw the first chair," I replied. That was all she needed. Within 20 minutes, her assistant brought in a legal pad and started taking notes. Isolde asked sharp, pointed questions. "When did your father pass? Do you have the probate documentation? Did Vera ever make statements about ownership in front of witnesses?" I answered each one with clarity. I had dates, names, even screenshots of emails where Vera referred to the house as mine and Callista's. She hadn't even bothered to lie in private. She just assumed I'd never see it. "We'll start by filing an injunction," Isolde said, "to freeze any activity involving the property. Then we build the civil suit, misappropriation, fraud, emotional damages if we want to go there." She paused, tapping her pen once on the desk. "But that's not where this ends, is it?" "No," I said. "There's more. And I want it all out in the open." That's when I told her about the gala, the annual community celebration where Vera stood at the podium and paraded herself as a paragon of family values. The same one where she'd once handed me a tray of drinks and told me to make myself useful, while strangers mistook me for catering staff. Isolde's eyebrows lifted slightly. What better place to let the mask drop? She asked if I had contacts inside the event team. I did. A childhood friend who now worked at the community center where the gala was hosted. Quiet girl, always observant, still owed me a favor from years back. "Perfect," Isolde said. We deliver a sealed envelope to the MC. He opens it live on stage as part of a tribute to family strength. Then we let the content speak. "What content?" I asked, though I already knew. She leaned forward. "The receipts, the forged deeds, The voice recording, the text from your sister, every piece of truth they buried. The plan formed quickly. Isolde drafted a legal packet and had it ready for courier delivery the next day. Meanwhile, I compiled a clean version of all digital materials, organized, labeled, impossible to ignore. I found an old flash drive from my university days, bright red with a cracked corner. I wiped it clean and loaded everything onto it. There was something poetic about using something broken to deliver the truth. Late that night, after hours of back-and-forth planning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. The documents were ready. The timing was set. I was exhausted but wired, like my veins had caffeine running through them instead of blood. I looked at the final folder on my desktop. Gala Reveal. Inside were 3 subfolders: property theft, voice recording, family messaging. I hovered over them for a moment, then dragged the entire folder onto the red flash drive. When the transfer completed, I clicked eject, pulled it out, and held it in my hand. "Let them watch," I whispered. They had controlled the narrative for years, smiling at cameras, painting me as the unstable one, the problem child, the one who never quite measured up. They crafted the story to suit their image, while mine was edited out completely. But this time, I had the mic. The ride over to the community center was quiet. I didn't play music. I didn't rehearse anything in my head. I just drove with the windows slightly cracked, letting in the cool Saturday night air that smelled faintly of pine and distant barbecue. Downtown Savannah always had a strange quiet to it on weekends, like the buildings themselves were holding their breath. The parking lot was already full when I arrived. I backed into a space near the edge, far from the entrance. I didn't need a grand entrance. I wasn't here to be seen. I was here to be heard. Inside the St. Michael's Community Center, the lights were warm, dim to the golden hue every gala tries to capture. Tables were dressed in ivory cloth, glasses clinked. Waitstaff moved like shadows between guests. The chatter was light, full of empty compliments and forced laughter. I walked in wearing a black dress that used to belong to my aunt, the kind of simple, elegant thing that made people look twice, not because it screamed wealth, but because it whispered dignity. My hair was pulled back tight. No jewelry, no makeup besides a little powder. I didn't need to shine tonight. I needed to anchor. As I stepped through the main entrance, a few heads turned. Some guests whispered. Most didn't recognize me. On purpose, I assumed. That was always the plan, wasn't it? Keep me quiet long enough, and eventually, even the family tree would forget a branch had once grown this way. Vera was already at the podium. I spotted her easily under the spotlight. She wore burgundy silk and pearls. Her hair was perfect, and her smile was as polished as ever. She spoke about family, legacy, what it means to raise daughters with integrity and grace, she said. I moved to the back of the room, standing behind the last table where no one sat. I leaned slightly against a wall and folded my arms. My heart was steady, not calm, but certain. As Vera began to wrap up her speech, the MC stepped forward with a smile and a small envelope in hand. I recognized the handwriting. It was Isolde's, deliberate and clinical. "This next segment," the host said, "comes from an anonymous contributor who wanted to offer a special tribute. Something personal, something powerful." Vera turned her head slightly, that smile faltering just a touch. A screen behind her flickered to life. At first, it was just the house deed, the one with my name, the notary stamp, my father's clean signature. Then, the second deed appeared beside it. Callista's name, a forged version of the same signature. The date, clear as day, 2 months after my father's death. Murmurs rippled across the room. Next came the screenshots. Callista's text. "I only did what Mom told me. She said it was just paperwork." Then, photos. The old family picture where I'd been cut out. The art project I'd made that had been credited to Callista. One by one, pieces of the truth stacked themselves before the crowd like dominoes falling in perfect rhythm. Vera didn't move. She stared at the screen. Her smile was gone now, replaced by something tighter. Confused, maybe, or scared. Then the audio started. My father's voice. "There are things I couldn't say while alive," it began, "but I saw what they were doing to you. The lies, the rewriting. I signed what I thought was routine. It wasn't. It was a trap. And if you're hearing this, they've gone too far. Gasps. A wine glass shattered somewhere near the front row. Then came Vera's voice, crisp and damning. She bruises easy, so dramatic. Honestly, if I hadn't had her, I wouldn't be in this tax bracket. It echoed through the speakers with brutal clarity. People turned. Some looked at Vera, some looked down at their laps. Callista, seated at a table close to the stage, stood up abruptly and stormed out. She didn't even pretend to smile, didn't say goodbye. Vera finally moved. She stepped back from the microphone, one hand clutching her wrist. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The crowd shifted. Quiet whispers turned into sharp side comments. "Is this real?" someone said behind me. Another voice, older, maybe from one of the church board members, said simply, "It's all dated. You can't fake a timestamp like that." A woman in a silver dress walked up to Vera and asked if she was okay. Vera didn't answer. One of the church elders, a man who'd known our family since I was little, stood slowly and walked out without a word. And still, the screen played. At some point, the audio stopped. The room was silent except for the low hum of the projector. No music, no applause, just absence. I didn't wait to be acknowledged. I didn't walk to the stage. I didn't need to. I stood a little straighter, glanced once around the room, and said, to no one in particular, but loud enough, "You wanted me invisible. Let's see how visible you feel now." And then I turned and walked out. No one stopped me. No one dared. Outside, the air was cool and still. I walked to my car with slow, even steps. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The silence in that room would echo longer than any applause. The morning sun slipped across my kitchen floor like nothing had changed. But everything had. It had been 48 hours since the gala, and my phone hadn't stopped vibrating. Unknown numbers. Mom. Callista. Work. At first, I let the calls go to voicemail without checking them. I didn't want to hear whatever they thought would soften the truth. But curiosity always has teeth. And I was ready. By mid-morning, I sat down with a mug of tea and pressed play. Serafina. My mother's voice cracked through the speaker, quieter than I'd ever heard it. I didn't know it would go that far. Please, talk to me. You've made your point. No apology, just panic. Another voicemail followed. Callista this time, rushed and out of breath. You can't just do this to us. You made it public. And you ruined everything. I lost my job. My clients are dropping. What were you thinking? Then came the third, different tone, measured. I lost everything. We lost everything, Callista said. But you got what you wanted, didn't you? I stared out the window, watching a few yellow leaves flutter to the ground. Autumn had finally settled in, and the air carried a kind of quiet that felt deserved. I took one last sip of tea, set my mug down, and hit redial. Callista picked up on the first ring. I was going to keep ignoring you, I said, keeping my voice calm. But I think you need to hear this. She didn't say anything at first, just breathed. You didn't lose everything, Callista. You lost everyone. There's a difference. And I hung up. No more space in my life for people who only called when they were cornered. Let them call each other now. I was done being the emergency contact for a fire they started. The fallout didn't take long to make its way across town. By Sunday, my neighbor, Mrs. Green, who'd lived in the unit next to mine for over 10 years, caught me at the mailbox. Did you hear? She asked, handing me a package that had been mistakenly placed in her box. They took Vera's name off the Women's Council. Quietly, but it's done. I nodded once. I figured. She's poisoned now. No one wants to be seen with her. I overheard someone at church saying she had that coming. She looked at me carefully, waiting for a response. I just offered a small smile and said, "Hope it was worth it." By Tuesday, Callista had been let go from her PR firm. Her face disappeared from the agency website, her last campaign now attributed to a junior associate. She posted something vague on social media, some quote about growing through what you go through, but comments were turned off. And the house was mine again. It happened faster than I expected. The court ruling came through midweek. Fraudulent signatures, probate violations, intentional misrepresentation. Why Soldi had done her job well. She always did. I didn't go to celebrate. No champagne. No dinners. I just asked the clerk to mail the title to my apartment. When the envelope came, I opened it at my kitchen counter, alone. I ran my fingers over the words, Serafina D. Fletcher, sole owner. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt done. Later that week, I drove out to the house. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need an audience. I parked in the driveway slowly, as if the gravel beneath the tires might protest my return. The windows were dark. Vera had cleared out. The curtains she once insisted on washing by hand were gone. The porch plants, dead and brittle, leaned into each other like they'd given up. I walked through the front door with a copy of the title in my purse and my name in my throat. Every creak in the floorboards was familiar. I didn't flinch. I didn't touch anything. Didn't linger in old bedrooms or open closets. I walked straight to the attic. There, under a dusty plastic bin filled with holiday ornaments, I found it. The frame I made in junior high. Still wrapped in the tissue paper I'd used the day I gave it to her. She hadn't even unwrapped it. I held it for a long time. Not because I missed her, but because it reminded me of the girl I used to be. The one who kept hoping her mother would finally say, "I'm proud of you." I slipped the frame into a cloth bag and walked back down. I didn't take pictures. I didn't cry. I locked the door behind me with the new keys Isolde's office had couriered over. Then I drove back to my apartment with the window cracked open and the cool breeze against my face. That night, I sat at my desk for the first time in weeks with no tabs open, no files stacked. Instead, I opened a blank document. Title: For the girls they said were too dramatic. I typed slowly, thoughtfully, letting the words find me instead of forcing them. It wasn't a memoir, it was a proposal, a nonprofit, a program for women who had been ghosted inside their own homes, daughters disinherited, sisters replaced, wives silenced, a place to hold the forgotten, not just heal them. I named it the Restoration Project, because I couldn't undo what they did to me, but I could make sure someone else didn't go through it alone. The days settled into a quiet rhythm, not peaceful exactly, but steady. I found comfort in repetition. Mornings started with coffee on the fire escape, a blanket over my knees, and the city murmuring below. From my second-floor apartment, I could see the changing trees along the sidewalk, their leaves turning brittle and gold. Every so often, a breeze would lift one and carry it past me before dropping it like a memory no longer needed. I worked from home now, editing copy for a nonprofit journal, designing digital guides for women's shelters, and slowly building out the Restoration Project. I wasn't making much money, but enough. And more importantly, I felt like I was pouring energy into something that mattered. People knew me now, not as Vera's daughter or Callista's sister, but just Serafina. The barista at the corner cafe smiled when I walked in. The mail carrier remembered my name. The woman 2 doors down stopped me one afternoon to say, "I watched the clip. That took guts. Good for you." It felt strange, being seen on my own terms. Still, not everything had a neat ending. One afternoon, I sat at my desk and opened a document I'd left untouched for weeks. I called it The Letter I'll Never Send. It wasn't long, just a few lines. "Mom, I don't hate you. I just no longer believe in the version of love you taught me to survive. S." I closed the document without saving. There was nothing else to say. Some wounds didn't scar because they healed. They scarred because they stayed open too long. Instead of writing more, I turned my attention to my nonprofit. The Restoration Project was slowly gaining traction. Word of mouth traveled faster than I expected. My first client was a woman named Bernice, 62 years old, a retired school secretary who had been cut out of her family's will after caring for her mother for over a decade. When her mom passed, her brothers inherited everything: the house, the savings, even the dog. "I didn't want money," she told me over herbal tea at my apartment. I just wanted someone to say thank you. She pulled out a small tin and opened it carefully. Inside were 4 pieces of crumpled construction paper, crayon drawings, faded and torn. She let me keep these, Bernice said, but only because she thought they were Callie's. Callie was her niece. They were Bernice's drawings. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush her. I listened, not as a victim, not even as someone who had it worse or better, but as someone who understood what it meant to be overwritten. When she finished, I asked if she wanted to pursue legal action. She shook her head. I just want to leave a mark of my own before I go. We framed her drawings, all 4, hung them in the entrance of the community center with her name printed in bold underneath. Made by Bernice, age 8. She cried when she saw them. I didn't mention my own story, not unless asked. It wasn't about reliving my pain, it was about reclaiming my space and helping others do the same. Even so, the past didn't leave completely. Some nights I still dreamed of the chair, not the impact, not the blood, but the silence that followed, that quiet where no one moved, no one gasped, no one came to check on me. I'd wake up with my hand clenched, heart pounding, the memory more of a weight than a nightmare. But I'd breathe. I'd sit up, look around my warm apartment, and say aloud, "That silence isn't home anymore." It became a kind of mantra, a reminder that silence wasn't safety, and now it didn't own me. One late afternoon, I went for a walk. It was the kind of day that smelled like leaves and wood smoke. The sun was low, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. As I turned a corner near the old church on Habersham Street, I saw her. Vera. She sat alone on a bench outside the side entrance, hands folded in her lap. She wasn't dressed up like she used to be. No pearls, no pressed blazer, just a cardigan and slacks, her hair pulled back with a simple clip. She wasn't talking to anyone. Just sitting, staring at the sidewalk as people walked past without looking twice. She didn't see me, and I didn't stop. We didn't need words. What would they fix? What would they change? Some endings don't need closure. As I walked past her, I didn't feel pity or victory. I felt space, a release. I turned the corner and stepped into the sunlight, letting it warm my face. For the first time in a long time, I smiled, not because I was fully healed, not because I was finally okay, but because I had survived, and I belonged to myself.